Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 28th of October. It's starting to feel and look a little bit more like wintertime around Alaska, and surely and slowly we'll get there. A surge of colder air is coming our way. We'll talk about that here in just a few minutes, and for many folks that will represent at least a little bit more of a winter-like change for you in the coming days. You can always get the latest forecast information, like the information about the cool down to come or any chances of snow and rain, by heading to weather.gov/Alaska. You can also type in weather.gov/Fairbanks or /Juneau or /Anchorage and get your localized weather information depending on what part of Alaska you're in. The weather info line is open, of course, at 800-472-0391, and you can find more information during the day and in between Alaska Weather's shows on Facebook at NWS Alaska there, on Twitter, and of course on YouTube. You'll get your daily afternoon map briefing. There is the quick shot of colder air. Looks like the Arctic is, well, we've been talking about getting ready to open for business, and now it seems like it's actually opening the door a little bit. Colder air is spilling down as we head into Thursday night and Friday. It should run pretty close to the western coast and also move over the North Slope and parts of the north central interior. And as it gets closer to the Alaska Peninsula and some of the capes out in western Alaska, it will probably bring some stronger gusts with that as well, and some threats for freezing spray across areas around the St. Lawrence Island region and northward into the open waters of the Chukchi. So as that moves in Thursday night and into Friday, it will probably represent a change of about 5 to 10 degrees or so from where you've been. Again, that will bring some more northerly winds through the region, and then gradually as we head into Saturday and Sunday, that cool down will retreat just a little bit there, so it won't last the entirety of the weekend. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and you can see one area of stronger low pressure here across the Kamchatka Peninsula. At least the leading edge of that warmer air is lifting northward, and this is one reason why that cold air is not going to stick around all weekend long. The door opening comes from around the Chukchi Sea in eastern Asia, where that colder air is going to drop southward. And as that passage moves through, as we get into Friday and Saturday, it should quickly be replaced by more of a south and westerly flow. And you'll see that showing up in the marine maps in just a little bit as those southerly winds return to Attu and Shemya. Here's a loop one more time, and you can see there is another area of circulation just south of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. This wave of low pressure is just one of several across the Gulf of Alaska that's going to keep quite a bit of unsettled weather across the Gulf as we head into the next 24 to 48 hours. A look at the rest of the state shows one of those waves working up towards southeast. That's going to bring a better chance for some light rainfall and showers as we go ahead into Thursday and Friday. Across south central, there's been some pockets of rainfall, mainly along the Gulf Coast there around Homer and into Prince William Sound. And Kodiak has seen slightly drier weather today after more than 3 inches of rainfall reported in 24 hours across the eastern end of the island. As I have it on good authority, that's usually just called a shower there for Kodiak Island. And across the central and western interior, you can see clouds have been building in there. The colder air really is still locked up north. The temps up across the North Slope still in the teens and 20s for most areas, but you can see the brighter white clouds here indicating that new air mass that's dropping southward. This will be racing southward as we get into tomorrow night and into Friday, again with that cooler weather there. So as that's poised and ready to go, we're kind of in the waiting stage now. We've got low pressure acting as a vacuum across the Gulf of Alaska that's keeping things fairly warm across the Gulf now, but is going to help to draw in that colder air racing down the west coast here in the next 24 hours. A few areas of snow showers across the Kuskokwim and the lower Yukon, and snow showers across the North Slope as well. Some pockets of rainfall in southeast, and that wave of low pressure as deep as 982 millibars across the Alaska Peninsula and very close to Kodiak Island, with a ridge of high pressure across the western Bering Sea at 1,024 millibars. Getting into tonight, we're going to start to set up a wave or a circulation across the northern parts of the Alaska Range. The warmer air is still trying to lift northward, and the colder air is dropping southward across the Bering. This is it's not really a true cold front, so if you're following along at home and you're looking at your own surface weather charts and saying, why did you draw that in there? Well, there is a little bit of a shift, but it's not a really perfect shift at the surface. So this is kind of we'll just put a little mark on this and maybe a question mark and saying it's a sort of cold front. As this moves southward, though, you will see a discernible change in the weather. The real true cold air is still back across the Chukchi Sea, and once this trough of low pressure swings eastward, that drops southward fairly quickly as we head into Thursday afternoon and evening. That's going to make it easier for some light rainfall across the Alaska Peninsula as well as the central and eastern Aleutians. You'll see a better chance for snow developing late in the day across the Alaska Range, mainly on the western side and up north. And at this time, as far as south central goes, we're not really seeing a very good signature for snow to develop across places like the Matanuska or Susitna Valleys, the Anchorage Bowl, or the Kenai Peninsula. Chances are a lot of snow development, if we see it, will be around Talkeetna and northward. Most likely that will be over the mountains more than anywhere else. As we get into Friday, there's a better chance that that's going to occur. And as you look southward, it's only going to be a mild interaction, it looks like, between low pressure and the moisture moving through and the colder air. Rain and snow showers may be possible, especially around higher terrain. Snow showers may develop across parts of the Copper River Basin, but already you can see drier air is developing across south and western Alaska and the middle Yukon Valley, the Seward Peninsula, and all the way up across the northwestern Brooks Range, where you'll see a decent chance of sunshine, even though the daylight hours are getting shorter and shorter. As that's happening, another wave of low pressure moves out across the northern sections of the ridge that's just across the western chain at 1,031 millibars. So already another round of cold is getting ready. This is another sign that winter is coming, of course. And for southeast, as this wave moves out of the Gulf, this represents a much better chance for some wetter weather across the central and southern parts of southeast. There may be some snow across the higher terrain, the Chilkoot and White Pass. But more importantly, for places along the Alaska Peninsula, you should also pay attention to the winds coming up. As we get into the Thursday night and Friday, probably be some pretty strong northerly winds, at least gales there with gusts that are going over 40 knots or so at times. So be prepared for that. And again, this should move through just as quickly as it moves in as we get into Friday and again on Saturday. Temps today back in the 40s and 50s for southeast, a pleasant day around Ketchikan and Annette. 50 in Sitka with the capital city showing temperatures in the upper 40s today, as well as Haines and Skagway. Hyder showed 46, and southern parts of Yukon back in the mid to upper 30s, so fairly mild even in the interior of Alaska, and certainly for Canada as well. Lower 40s around Cordova and Valdez today, with 50 around Seward, about 51 in Homer. 43 was the temperature in Kenai, 41 in Anchorage, with 37 in Talkeetna. 28 at the Matanuska Glacier. It was 30 around Glen Ellen and Golcana, with Eagle showing 25. Northway was also 25, and just above freezing late this afternoon for Fairbanks at 33, 25 in Fort Yukon with the Arctic coast in the single digits and teens, 9 in Barrow with 20 in Kaktovik. The Kotzebue Sound region was in the teens and 20s with Shishmaref all the way up to 30 this afternoon. 35 around Nome, 35 in McGrath as well. Galena had 28. Tanana at 31 degrees with Sparabon. It's showing temps in the mid-30s. Looked like Grayling was also 34. Bethel a little bit milder still, and Nunivak Island also 37 degrees there with St. Lawrence Island and Gamble at 30. Bristol Bay temperatures were just shy of 50 degrees for many locations, including King Salmon. It was 46 in Dillingham, 42 in Cape Newenham, a little bit warmer still for St. Paul and St. George. The Alaska Peninsula was primarily in the 40s today, but Sandpoint made it all the way up to 50. A little bit cooler for Kodiak Island today, and 46 degrees for Adak, 48 in Atka, and 42 around Shemya this afternoon. Now, overnight low temperatures south of the Yukon will be a little bit milder. Some places still below freezing, most areas in the mid-20s to upper 30s. South central, upper 30s to about 40 degrees, including Kodiak, lower to mid-50s for southeast. The chain, a little bit on the cooler side tonight, upper 30s and lower 40s for many locations there. The west coast, mostly in the low 20s next to the ocean, 30 degrees in St. Lawrence. Teens for most of the Kotzebue Sound region. You might find a few interior locations dropping into the single digits, and most of the North Slope probably closer to that 10-degree mark for overnight lows. High temperatures tomorrow struggle to make it out of the mid-teens, so most places there won't even tap 20. Kaktovik might be one of the spots that goes over at 21 degrees. Fairbanks looking at temperatures holding below freezing for most of the day, 31 for you. Mid-40s for South Central, 50 in Kodiak. Southeast looking at 40s and 50s. The Alaska Peninsula in the mid to upper 40s, with Sandpoint again one of the warmer spots. Southwest and Bristol Bay in the upper 30s to mid 40s. Looks like Ammonik and places around the YK Delta will hover in the lower to mid 30s. Nunivak Island 37, cooler at St. Lawrence at 32, and Unalakleet closer to 28 with Nome showing 32 degrees, and Shishmaref closer to 30 itself. Now, as we go into flying weather, notice that there's not a whole lot of IFR right now. We're not expecting that there's going to be an awful lot of visibility or ceiling restrictions during the daytime tomorrow as that colder air is dropping southward. One area that we'll watch is across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast there for IFR in the afternoon. Most of southeast is looking at MBFR, and you'll notice that even breaks up across Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait, and the Barrens, and down the Pacific coastline of the Alaska Peninsula until you get to about Sand Point. Most of the Aleutians are expecting MBFR restrictions there, as well as through the Bering Strait into Nunivak Island and St. Lawrence Island, with many west and north of the Alaska Range to the Brooks Range summits expecting VFR conditions through the afternoon. Here's your past conditions, and you could probably do this after seeing the map. We're going to say MBFR for Anaktuvik, for Adigan Pass, Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. You getting a pattern here? Rainy Pass, MBFR. Let's see if we can do it for windy. Yes, we can. MBFR there, and for Isabel Pass, and for Mentasta Pass, marginal conditions, as well as Tanita Pass, MBFR, Portage Pass. There we go. A little bit of fun. IFR conditions in the morning, transitioning to MBFR conditions through the day. Most of the pass probably holding at VFR. It will mainly be the eastern side looking at IFR conditions there. And Chilkoot and White Pass also enjoying a little bit of IFR in the morning, but probably looking at improvements by the afternoon. Freezing levels show that colder air is dropping southward. As we look at this again for the next day to follow, this should be a lot further southward. So watch for some changes there as we get into Thursday and Friday for sure. Otherwise, the warmer air aloft is also retreating across the Gulf. You can see levels ranging from 2,000 to 4,000 feet around Haines and Skagway to Juneau, and then south of Haida Gwaii to about 6,000 feet. 2,000 to 4,000 foot levels around Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, and out west, warmer air is already trying to build in as that next system is working its way toward the Bering Sea. Icing potential seems pretty low at this point around the Bering Strait and the western sections of the Chukchi Seacoast, Point Hope and Point Lay. You might find some isolated moderate below 3,000 feet. North of the Alaska Range, as that band of moisture sets up across some of the higher terrain, there's a potential for that to be above 1,000 feet, maybe some isolated moderate, as well as areas along the Alaska Range above 3,000 feet, and also for southeast above 6,000 feet. So again, you'll have to climb up there a little ways to find a better chance for some icing potential. Tomorrow's jet stream shows the ridge of high pressure building in across the western and central Bering. The faster moving river of air stretches to about 50 to 90 knots or so at its peak in the west. The really juicy stuff is here out across the Gulf, with the winds up to 140 to 150 knots, and this is where most of the action is occurring, zipping the weather along just out of reach of most of Alaska. However, this northerly component is allowing that colder air to simply ride the slide down and move its way down the west coast as we get to the afternoon and evening hours tomorrow. That process will begin. At 9,000 feet, you can see several waves of low pressure across the interior, across northern Yukon, and across the Gulf of Alaska. This is keeping that southwesterly flow moving through Panhandle with 30 to 40 knots there. The ridge of high pressure seen out across the west, with north and westerly winds coming in and slowing down a little bit around 15 to 30 knots. Northwesterlies also cruising through the Bering Strait at a decent pace at 20 to 30 knots. A little bit more of a northerly flow coming around the Chukchi Seacoast tomorrow at 3,000 feet. 15 knots there, picking up a little bit more across Amonuk and Nunivak Island at 30 knots. Winds are fairly light across the northern Gulf at this point tomorrow. Light winds across the interior from the north and northeast, and west and southwesterlies moving into the eastern Gulf at 30 to 40 knots, with high pressure just south of Shemya and Attu, with northerlies cutting through the central chain. So turbulence, we would expect that during the daytime tomorrow, especially late, and then especially into Thursday night and Friday, we'll probably see a better chance for some isolated moderate around the Capes and the western bays and into Akatsubu Sound, and probably south of some of the higher terrain there for the Seward Peninsula, generally below 3,000 feet. So watch for those areas there, as well as gaps and passes through the chain and the Alaska Peninsula as we get into Friday, probably an even windier start there. For the central and southern parts of the Panhandle, below 4,000 feet, let's keep in mind that a triple point area of low pressure is working northward. Not only will this bring a risk of thunderstorms to the region, most of those in the marine areas, but once we get into Friday, there's a better chance for some thunderstorm activity across some of the southern inner waterways there. So not only turbulence and wind shifts, but probably a chance for some convection there as we get into the next couple of days. So keep an eye on that. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned. Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining us again, talking about the Augmented Reality Sandbox, is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. And he's actually talking about a project from AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. A lot of acronyms, but some really fun stuff today, right, Eric?
You bet. We've got a learning tool that is a tool that's fun to use, and it really has a relevance to actually daily lives of anyone who goes outside and sees lumpy topography in Alaska. We've got a lot of mountains and such. You know, when I was younger and go on your first hike in the hills, say, you're given, maybe you're in the Boy Scouts or you get at the kiosk at the trailhead, a topographic map, a flat piece of paper with all these lines on it, bullseyes, long lines that curve back on themselves, say, perhaps things that look like this. A quadrangle or a topographic map. We've got here just to illustrate a couple of examples near Denali. Alaska has so much topography, so many mountains. And what are all these lines that we see? It can be tough to know what this means the first time you look at it. What we've got, all these lines represent lines of where the elevation of the topography goes through a certain level above sea level, say that this line represents where the mountains have gone from below 1,000 feet, mean sea level, up through 1,000 feet and above. That's your 1,000-foot contour. And when the mountain keeps going up, you're up to 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet, and so on. And that's how you get this little bullseye around the peak of a mountain.
Kind of makes layered slices, right?
Kind of like layered slices. Nice way to look at that. And when you see the lines are closer together, you're going up more steeply. If the mountain rises more slowly, it takes you longer in horizontal space to go through those different vertical increments. So
that is really hard to visualize.
Right. Imagine you're looking at a 2D piece of paper, two-dimensional piece of paper, but you're trying to understand what the three-dimensional world looks like. Well, enter the augmented reality sandbox. Yes, what is that? It is right here. We have the sandbox with us today, Sandbox 2.0, portable version.
Sweet.
Built up at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we've got a couple of folks helping out today.
Let's see, Alana Valaji, and she's a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. If you want to give us a thumbs up there, Alana, thanks for helping us out today. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator from AKwx, also helping us out today. Thanks, Courtney.
And this tool here has a Microsoft Kinect to sense the level of sand in this sandbox. And then the Kinect feeds its information into a computer that then sends a signal to a projector to draw the appropriate topographic lines on this topography. The fun thing about this, as we can see here, is that the sandbox and its Kinect and its projector, they all work as a team. So here we've got a mountain in the middle of the sandbox. What if we took down the mountain to some degree? Watch as the software responds and redraws the topography.
Kind of a caldera forming there.
There you go, And what's fun about the sandbox too is it knows that gravity flows downhill, and we've got some water that's actually down in the lowest elevations. And what's happening now is we're making it rain a little bit. We'll fill up rain into that elevated lake bed, that caldera, as you said. And so now water is pooled up there. And what if you gouged out an outlet channel?
Glacial dam release.
There you go. The water flows out. What we're seeing here is a tool that allows people to touch and connect, Microsoft Connect, RRR, to connect two-dimensional topographic maps like what we have here, these flat things on a piece of paper, to the real three-dimensional world. I think this Sandbox's real particular application as a learning tool to young people is, what does a two-dimensional map mean when it's trying to represent the three-dimensional world? This sandbox is kind of both at once. It's actually three-dimensional, lumpy topography there, the sand, but it's got these lines drawn on the three-dimensional sand that would be on a two-dimensional piece of paper.
Wow, that is a huge leap from the learning that we experienced when we were younger to how children and even adults are visualizing in these new forms of technology. Allows that to kind of reshape their thinking and visualize this in a very useful and absolutely hands-on way. It's amazing.
It's a hands-on tool, and
it's hard for me to sit here and not go play with that.
Well, that's what happened at GINA, up at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, when the first model was being made, the prototype with plywood and such. We had professional adult professor types had heard about this, and they came by because they wanted to see how it worked.
Okay.
And everyone becomes that idealistic, wonder-filled youngster.
Sure.
And you just can't help but play with that, and to see how it reacts in time, and
Right.
it's a dynamic learning tool, and it
Dynamic,
responds.
That's exactly the word.
And
Yeah.
you wonder what applicabilities beyond a teaching
Right.
tool for
Where does it
topography
go?
can it have. You can see how in Alaska we have inundation mapping is an issue. If you had water slosh inland, say in a coastal flooding event
Right.
on the western coast of Alaska or the Arctic coast, you could see this. The concept is illustrated here as an introductory learning method. I think this is a potentially good outreach tool for all of us in Alaska.
Okay, so not only just a topographical sense, a mapping sense, maybe something that leads into understanding of how geographic information systems work with GIS, but also geology, if we wanted to get into kind of the formations and the bigger land masses and the representation of the 2D map. We could go into hydrology, which is very important in Alaska, of course. And even just understanding a weather sense. Mounding up a big pile of sand could be that Arctic high pressure system sitting on top of Fairbanks, and the voids would be low pressure systems. This can go a lot of different directions.
Yes, exactly. It's not just landforms, but pressure has contours of high pressure and low pressure. And I wish I had had this kind of a learning tool when I was taking
kidding.
Meteorology 101 back 25 years ago.
Wow.
Would have been helpful, I think.
Probably would have gotten a better grade, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming by, Eric, and Alana and Courtney, thank you so much for your help there in the sandbox. We are going to play in the sandbox a little bit more coming up tomorrow on our next edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We hope you join us for that. In the meantime, make sure you go to alaska.edu/EPSCOR. That's alaska.edu EPSCOR to learn more information about what we're doing with this augmented reality sandbox around Alaska. We'll see you next time on Alaska Weather Facts. By far one of the most fun segments we've ever taped here at Alaska Public. Be sure and check that out. You can do that on YouTube as well. Here's a look at the sea ice edge. As of today, our sea ice experts have analyzed some new ice there north and west of Point Lay. You can see the greater concentrations here in white. That's above 80%. Some of the lower concentrations ice to as low as 20% around the Chukchi Seacoast, and building out. There's shown in blue also around Kotzebue Sound, around Kotzebue itself. Not so much on the north coast there around Shishmaref just yet, but you just wait. Temperatures in the sea surface are changing quickly and cooling down. So with colder air dropping southward, you probably expect some changes as we head into the weekend, but one thing to remember, as long as the winds are blowing, it's going to make that formation a little bit more difficult. Now, as we look at Thursday in the marine areas for southeast, south and easterly winds are moving northward. Here is a chance for showers and thunderstorms in the region, so convective weather again, not a mariner's best friend, so keep that in mind. You could experience some thunderstorms, especially as that triple point is working eastward and northward slowly. By Friday, the threat for thunder is gone at this point. You see southeasterlies coming in from 15 to 25 across the inner channels and along the outer coast, a south and southeasterly flow all the way up to Yakutat from the Dixon entrance at 20 to 25. Northerly winds opposing that flow in the Lynn Canal at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea on Friday. For south central, no threat for thunder here, but we have winds lightly blowing down the Cook Inlet at about 10 to 15 with 3 to 4 foot seas in most areas, 5 foot seas as you get closer to the Shelikof Strait region, and northwesterlies coming out of the Barrens and over Kodiak Island also at 10 to 15. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound as strong as 15 knots with a 3-foot sea on Thursday. That should diminish and turn to more of a northerly direction as we get into Friday. 2-foot sea inside, 5-foot seas on the outside. And for the western Gulf and around the Barrens, 35-knot winds there with seas as high as 10 feet. Northwesterlies pick up a little bit more over Kodiak Island, 30 to 40 knots with 12-foot seas east of Kodiak Island. And northerlies also increase down Cook Inlet, 15 to 20 knots as you pass Calgan Island. For the Alaska Peninsula, northerlies will be the rule for Thursday, and higher gusts should be expected, especially as the day goes on. 25 to 40 knots on the Bering Sea coast and 20 to 25 for the Pacific, with 9-foot seas expected on Thursday. By Friday, you can see the stronger winds building in and higher gusts, of course, on the lee side of the peninsula. 11 to 15-foot seas are expected there with winds, I should say, easy for me to say, 40 to 45 knots picking up throughout the day. I'm already thinking about the cold air moving in. My lips must be responding in kind. Northerlies around the west, central to the eastern side of the chain there. Look for winds from 20 knots in the west to 30 knots in the east, 12 to 15 knots for the central and 12 to 15-foot seas there for the central and eastern chain, and 9 to 13-foot seas there for areas from Nikolsky all the way out in Alaska. By Friday, you can see the reversal taking place out in the west. The southerlies already building in as that next weather system is moving into the western Bering. 40 knots there from the south with a 13-foot sea. Southwesterlies around Kiska. And we'll keep the northerlies going from Unalaska all the way to Atka. 15 to 25 knots on the Bering Sea coast with 7 to 10-foot seas there, and 15 to 30 across the Pacific Seacoast with 6 to 8-foot seas expected. The higher seas and stronger winds in the east still coming out of the north, and again those stronger winds already building in from the south and the west. North and westerlies will continue for Thursday along the west coast, and again the winds probably picking up throughout the day with some of the stronger gusts right around the bays and passes there. A freezing spray is a little more likely around St. Lawrence Island. Some of that could be heavy. Northerlies for St. Paul and St. George with a 12-foot sea. For Friday, the winds become more westerly with time. Look for 20 knots with a 6-foot sea. North and westerlies still coming out of the Bering Strait and down the southwest coast at 25 to 35 with 6 to 10-foot seas on either side of Nunivak Island and the Kuskokwim Bay area. Southwesterlies for the St. Matthew Island waters. For the north coast, north and easterlies for the Beaufort Sea coast. Again, this now filled in with ice, 15 to 20 knots there. A light offshore winds from Wainwright down toward Cape Lisburne, an east to northeasterly wind at 10 to 15, and northerlies outside of Kotzebue Sound at 25 knots, also with a threat for heavy freezing spray. The winds are going to switch around a little bit on Friday. Look for north and westerlies coming into Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. Southerlies north of Point Lay and southeasterlies around Barrow, all light, 10 to 15 knots. Stronger winds, though, still outside of Kotzebue Sound and northerlies with a 20-knot wind and a 6-foot sea, and still watching for that heavy freezing spray. As we're talking about, colder air is poised and ready to drop southward. Tonight out of the Chukchi Sea, we'll start to see that process begin. In the meantime, rain showers around the Gulf Coast, a chance for some thunderstorms south and west of Haida Gwaii, and snow showers in the interior. A better chance for a light and accumulating snow for the central and eastern interior tomorrow, maybe an inch or so. Light rainfall around Bristol Bay and southward along the Aleutians, but colder air will be dropping southward on a stronger northerly flow. And that means some gusty and northerlies across the Alaska Peninsula and the west coast as things dry up. The focus for light precipitation will continue in the Gulf. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.